One thing that I find interesting about our industry is that even with many advanced tools for integration, a lot of the times we just default to transferring CSV files when two systems need to talk to each other. And very often, the protocol that we use for transferring those CSV files is SFTP. So recently, I had this use case as well. I had to install an SFTP server on a Windows machine because I had a Java process running on a different machine that would generate CSV files, and another system running on the Windows machine had to process it at the end of the day. Okay, so I agreed with the other party that I would transfer these files using SFTP, and they would be able to process the file that I generate by just reading the files from the local file system. Okay, so in order for this to work, I had to find an SFTP server for Windows. So before doing this, I didn't know that actually Microsoft has ported OpenSSH to Windows. So that means that as a regular Mac and Linux user, I'm very familiar with OpenSSH. So I wanted to see how different it was to use OpenSSH on Windows. And I was very pleasantly surprised that it's extremely similar, very similar. In fact, the configuration is almost identical. Um, so this is the website where you would be able to download the Microsoft port of OpenSSH. So to download the binaries, just click on the releases tag here. And let's download the latest beta. Okay, so I'm going to download this OpenSSH-Win64. Okay, I'm going to save it. Okay, then I'm going to extract it. Okay. So I'm going to rename this to OpenSSH. And then I'm going to move this to the program files directory. Okay. The next step is to run a PowerShell script that's included in the zip file that we just extracted. And the purpose of this PowerShell script is to install the OpenSSH service on this machine. So let's open a command prompt and let's go to the directory that we extracted the binaries just now. Okay, so as you can see, there is this file install-sshd.ps1. So we need to execute this file using PowerShell. So let's do that. PowerShell execution policy bypass -file install shd.ps1. Okay, so at this point, it has installed the SSH as a service on this machine. So if you want to start SSH, we need to run at start SSHD. Okay, so at this point, there should now be something running on port 22. So to check that, we can run netstat-a. So if you scroll up, we can see that there's now something running on port 22, which is the SSH port. So now that we have started the SSH service, we need to enable a firewall rule so that other computers can connect to this SFTP server. Okay, so to do that, use PowerShell, start up PowerShell, and the OpenSSH team at Microsoft, they've provided this command for us to create the firewall rule for this purpose. Okay, so let me go to FTP server. The next thing we want to do is that we want to configure the SSH server to start at system startup time. So the way we do that is by using this PowerShell command, set service. So now we've got our service running. The next thing we want to do is we want to create the user that will actually log in to the SFTP server to upload files. So the way we do that is, in PowerShell, you can type new local user, and let's give the name of the user user1. Okay, and let's give the user a password. Okay, so after we have generated the user account, what we want to do is we want to log in as the user, and we want to generate a key pair for that user. So let's log in on behalf of this user by using the run as command, and okay, let's run cmd, and let's provide the username. Okay, so now we have a command prompt running as that user. So let's go to that user's home directory. So now we're in the user's home directory. Inside this directory, let's create a directory called .ssh. Okay, in this directory, I want to generate a SSH key pair. So the program for this is SSH keygen. Okay, so at this point, there will be a file in this directory called idrsa and idrsa.pub. idrsa is the private key, and idrsa.pub is the public key. At this point, the user1 has a public and a private key. To allow that public key to be used to log in as user1, we need to create an authorize _ keys file. Okay, so the way we do that is we basically copy the idrsa.pub file into the authorize keys file. Okay, so we can have a look here at how it looks like. So actually, this authorized key file can contain multiple keys. That's why the file name is plural. Later on, we will add a key of a user from another machine so that he also can access this account remotely. Okay. The reason why we're setting up an SFTP server on this machine is so that a program running on this machine is able to receive and process CSV files from other systems in the organization. So we need to create that directory that will receive those files. So let's just open Windows Explorer, and let's go to C drive, and let's create a directory called incoming. Okay, so when when the other system connects to this machine, it will upload any files to this incoming directory, and the program on this machine will also be listening on that directory for files to process. Okay. Next thing you want to do is you want to configure the SSH server. So let's just close this window, and let's go back to the administrator console. So let's go to the directory that contains the SSHD configuration file. So that directory is C drive, program data. And inside here, there should be an SSH directory. So we open the SSH directory. And inside here, there will be an shd_config. Okay, so let's open that file in Notepad. Okay, so this is the config file. So what I like to do for all my SSH servers is that I like to disable password authentication. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. Yep, so I'm going to make password authentication no. Secondly, because I'm more used to seeing the logs in files rather than in the Windows event viewer, I'm just going to change the logging system so that it logs to a file rather than to the Windows event viewer. So I'm going to change this syslog facility to local 0. And I'm also going to change the log level to verbose just to help me troubleshoot things just in case something goes wrong. Okay, so let's save that. And let's start and stop the server so that we know it's still working. So net stop SSHD, net start SSHD. So the server started again, so we know we didn't do anything wrong. The next thing I want to do is I want to configure it so that it only enables SFTP access, because there's no reason to give them interactive console access. So I'm just going to force the user to only use this server for SFTP use. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create this command, force command internal SFTP. Okay. So with this, the user is forced to only use SFTP. They will not get a PowerShell or a CMD console. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to route the user that we created just now. If they log in, I want them to only be able to see the incoming directory. Okay. So the way we do that is we use a command called chroot directory. Okay. So match user 1, and let's do chroot directory C drive incoming. Okay. Okay. Then just to help us out a little bit, let's create a dummy file inside that directory so that we know when we connect to it over SFTP that we are in the correct directory. Okay, so let's create a file here and let's call it new file. Let's call it urin company. Okay, so now when we log in over SFTP, we should see this file so that we know that we are in the correct directory. So let's start and stop SSHD again. So now let's start and stop SSHD again. Let's stop SSHD. Let's start SSHD. Okay. Whoa. Okay, I made a mistake there. Let's see what was the mistake. Oh, okay, I misspelled chroot directory here. So this should be chroot directory. Okay, let's save it again. And let's stop and start SSHD again. Okay, now it's okay. So now let's try to log in using SFTP. So now it's started after we fixed that error in the configuration file. So now let's use that. Now let's use user. So now let's use user one's private key to log in to the SSHD server running on this machine. So first of all, let's create a command prompt as user one. So let's do this. Name user. So now we have a command prompt running as user one. So let's try to run the SFTP command. So just to make things easier, I'm just going to add it to the path. Just to make things easier, I'm going to add the OpenSSH binary directory to the path. So export set path is equal to path C drive program files OpenSSH. Okay, so now if I do SFTP and I type user1 at localhost, I should be able to log in. So it will ask me to accept the fingerprint because this is our first time connecting. Okay, so now we're connecting to SFTP. So when we list down the files, we should see that directory, that file that we created just now. Yep, so we have that file UR incoming, so we know we're in the correct path. So what chroot directory does is that it confines the SFTP user to just that directory path. They are not able to get out of that directory path. So we type our current directory, you see that we're in root. So they are already in the root, so they're not able to access files outside the root. So we don't have to worry about this user changing other files or reading other files. All they can see are files in the C drive incoming directory. This is all thanks to the chroot directory directive. At this point, we've seen how to allow a local user to access his own account over SFTP. But what if we wanted to allow a remote user to access this directory as user one? So what we need to do is we need to first generate a key for that remote user. So I'm going to switch to Mac for a while. I've switched to my Mac machine just so that I can show you the setup for a remote user. So let's generate a key for the remote user. Okay, so this will create the files upload user and upload user.pub. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to copy and paste the contents of upload user.pub. So let's do that. Cat upload user.pub. And let's copy this. Okay, now let's go back to Windows and let us close this first. And then let us run a command prompt as user one. Okay, now let's go to the user's SSH directory and let's edit the authorized key file and let's add the key of the remote user, the public key of the remote user. Paste. Okay. So now there are two public keys in this authorized keys file. Okay, let's save it. Let's exit this command prompt. Okay. So now that we've added the public key of the remote user to the authorized keys file of user one, we should be able to SFTP to this machine as user 1. So let's give that a shot. First, let's figure out the IP address of this machine. It's 192.168.56.102. So now let's switch back to the Mac and let's type SFTP -I upload user to specify the private key. And let us type the username, which is user1, and the IP address, which is 192.168.56.102. Okay. So this is our first time connecting to this server, so it will prompt us to accept the fingerprint. Let's just click yes. And there, we're connected. So now that we're connected, we can just type ls and we should see that file. You are incoming. So now that we've connected to the SFTP server, let's try to upload a CSV file to the server. I've already generated a CSV file in the TMP directory. So let's try uploading that. And put TMP 202.04.25.csv. Okay, so it's successfully uploaded, and let's ls, and now there are two files. So let's just check back on the Windows machine, and those files should be there. Okay, so as you can see, the CSV file is here. So now any program running on this Windows machine is able to process it. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show in this video. It's pretty great that there is now a high-quality, battle-tested SSH and SFTP server for Windows that is available for free. I hope that you'll start using this for your file transfer needs. Leave a comment if you run into any issues.